Elena had always known that her life would be difficult, but she had never imagined the extent to which her own family would shape that reality. Born into a household where beauty was currency and charm was revered above all else, she quickly learned that she was deemed insufficient. Her eyes were a gentle brown, her hair a soft chestnut, her face unmarked but plain. She possessed a quiet kindness and a patient heart, yet her qualities were invisible to those who only valued the glitter of outward appearances. In her family's eyes, she did not sparkle enough to matter. Every morning, she would watch her sisters prepare for the day with meticulous care, curling their hair, adorning themselves with ribbons, necklaces, and painted lips. They would giggle at the mirror, comparing their looks, each convinced she was the fairest. Elena would stand at the corner of the room, quietly combing her hair, tying it in a simple braid. She understood her place. She had learned not to expect compliments, not to hope for praise. When her parents' eyes fell upon her, it was often with disappointment or irritation. "You should try to make an effort," her mother would say, sometimes with a sigh that spoke more of burden than guidance. "You'll never attract anyone looking for a good match like that." Her father rarely said much, but the disappointment in his gaze was enough. The subtle shake of his head, the lack of warmth when she entered the room, were constant reminders of her perceived failure. Elena had learned to nod, to keep her voice low, to avoid drawing attention to herself. She became adept at disappearing into the background, fading into the walls like a shadow. The town itself seemed to confirm her family's verdict. At the market, merchants would smile at her politely but never linger. Other children would invite her siblings to play or join in games, while she was left standing, watching, silently wishing she could be noticed. Whispers followed her down streets and alleys. "She's plain. Does she even try? Why bother with her?" They were never cruel, but the soft dismissals cut deeper than any overt insult. Elena learned to walk with her eyes lowered, her thoughts quieted, her dreams carefully hidden. Then came the day the letter arrived. A courier appeared at the door with a thick envelope, its seal unmistakable, the mark of a wealthy rancher from a distant town. Elena's mother tore it open, her face lighting with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Her father leaned over, scanning the pages quickly, nodding once, sharply. Elena watched silently as they exchanged words she could barely hear, their voices low but urgent. "Elena," her mother said finally, her tone detached, "you're going to go. The rancher, he's looking for a young woman for his household. He's wealthy. We'll be well rewarded." Elena's stomach twisted. Go where?" she asked, voice trembling. "To his home," her mother said, brushing past her as if she were nothing more than an object to be moved. "He'll take care of you. And we'll be compensated for your value." The words, "compensated for your value," echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. Her pulse raced. She had heard of women being sold into marriage before, often whispered in the market or in hushed village conversations. But to be chosen herself, not for love, not for companionship, but because her family could make a profit from her, this reality was unbearable. She felt herself shrink under the weight of their casual cruelty, their lack of empathy, their complete disregard for her feelings. Elena's sisters looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and relief, as if some burden had been removed from their shoulders. "Well," one of them said, almost cheerfully, "finally something useful comes from having you around." The words cut deeper than knives. Elena wanted to scream, to run, to throw herself to the winds and escape this life that had never wanted her. But she had learned too well to contain her emotions. The preparations were swift. Elena packed the few belongings she had: a simple dress, a worn shawl, a pair of sturdy shoes, a small bundle of food. Her parents barely spoke to her during the packing, exchanging notes on money, land, and logistics. Her heart pounded as she climbed into the carriage that would take her away, the heavy wooden doors shutting behind her like a final sentence. As the carriage rattled over rough paths, Elena gazed at the receding village, the only home she had ever known. Fear and uncertainty gripped her. She did not know the man she was to meet, the life she was to enter, or if she would be accepted. Her family had deemed her too plain, too ordinary, too insignificant. But as the wind whipped her hair across her face, and the landscape of hills and fields stretched endlessly before her, a faint spark of hope flickered in her chest. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the horizon, her worth could be discovered, not by her appearance, but by her heart, her courage, and her spirit. Elena closed her eyes, clinging to that tiny hope, as the carriage carried her further from the life she had known and closer to the unknown that awaited. The ranch stretched farther than Elena had ever imagined, a sea of golden fields rolling into distant hills, punctuated by clusters of trees and glimmering streams. The air was dry, sweet with the scent of hay and livestock, and heavy with the heat of late afternoon. She had never seen wealth like this: grand barns, polished stables, acres of fertile land that seemed endless. But the grandeur only made her anxiety deepen. She did not belong here, and she feared the rancher would see her as the same plain, unremarkable girl her family had described. When she finally stepped from the carriage, her legs trembling under her, she came face to face with the rancher himself. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered, with a calm authority that seemed to command the very land around him. Yet his presence was not intimidating in the way she feared. It was measured, deliberate, and somehow gentle. His eyes, sharp and dark, seemed to study her with curiosity rather than judgment. Elena's throat tightened, and she forced herself to bow slightly. "You must be Elena," he said, his voice deep but soft, carrying across the yard without raising his tone. "I've heard a great deal about you." Elena's hands fidgeted with the edges of her shawl. I hope it's good, sir," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The rancher's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I've learned not to trust everything one hears. There's a difference between rumor and truth." His words, simple yet thoughtful, sent a small tremor of hope through her chest. Perhaps this was a man who might see beyond appearances. The first days on the ranch were a blur of work and observation. Elena tended to the animals, mucked out stalls, swept floors, and helped with cooking. She moved quietly, avoiding attention, as if her existence on the ranch were merely tolerated. And yet, the rancher watched her closely. He noticed the care with which she handled the animals, the precision in her movements, the soft tone she used even when the animals were unruly. It was the kind of attention to detail and empathy that could not be faked, no matter how beautiful or charming one might be. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the hills, casting a warm, golden glow across the rancher called Elena to the veranda. She hesitated, unsure if she had done something wrong, but obeyed, stepping carefully across the wooden planks. The light caught her face in a way that made her gasp inwardly. Her features, simple and plain in her own eyes, seemed softened by the sunset. Her eyes reflected a quiet resilience, her lips curved with a gentleness that no mirror at home had ever rewarded. "You carry yourself differently than I expected," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "There's a strength in you I didn't anticipate. Not in muscle or size, but in presence." Elena's stomach fluttered. "Presence?" she asked, uncertain what he meant. She had spent her life believing she had none. "Yes," he replied, "the world measures people by their appearances too often, but there is a truth in those who act without pretense. You have that truth. I see it." She blinked, feeling her cheeks warm. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not her family, not a teacher, not a neighbor. She had been ignored, dismissed, sold as if her value could be quantified in coins. Yet here was a man, a stranger with wealth and power, who did not see the plainness her family had fixated upon. Instead, he saw her heart, her spirit, and even her fears. The days grew longer, and Elena began to find comfort in the rhythm of the ranch. The rancher, though authoritative, was patient and observant. He never demanded blind obedience, he guided her, taught her, and allowed her space to learn. He noticed the small things, the way she watered plants with care, the way she spoke softly to a frightened horse, the gentle way she cleaned the kitchen. Every gesture was a note in a symphony he was quietly composing, a portrait of her as more than plain, more than ordinary. Then came a day when the rancher asked her to join him on a ride through the far fields. Elena hesitated, nervous on the unfamiliar horse, but his calm encouragement was steadying. Side by side, they rode through the rolling grasslands, the wind in their hair, the sky stretching endlessly above. For the first time in her life, Elena felt seen, not for beauty, not for charm, not for what her family said she should be, but for who she was. "You're unlike anyone I expected," he said quietly, glancing at her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "You don't need adornment or praise to be noticed. You have something far more rare, authenticity." Her heart swelled. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she could belong somewhere, that perhaps she could matter to someone. The rancher did not see a plain girl, he saw Elena. And in that moment, she realized that the life she had dreaded might be the life that saved her from invisibility forever. Weeks turned into months, and Elena's life on the ranch began to take on a rhythm she had never imagined possible. The endless days of hard work, which had initially intimidated her, became a source of quiet satisfaction. Each morning she rose with the sun, tending to the animals, mending fences, and helping in the house. The rancher never treated her like a servant, nor like a commodity to be bought and sold. Instead, he allowed her autonomy and observed her with an intensity that was both unsettling and reassuring. He asked for her opinion on matters of the land, the livestock, and even the management of the household. Her voice, long silenced in her family home, began to matter, and each acknowledgement bolstered her confidence. The transformation within Elena was subtle but profound. She began to walk with her head held a little higher, her shoulders squared, and her heart lighter. The fear that had haunted her since the moment her parents had sold her, the fear that she was unworthy, invisible, undeserving of love, slowly began to fade. The rancher's eyes, always watching, always noticing, had never lingered on her outward appearance. Instead, they saw the truth of her character, her steadfast heart, and her resilience. And in seeing that, he began to care for her in ways that went far beyond the transactional relationships she had known. One stormy evening, when the clouds hung heavy and low, Elena was in the stables, tending to the animals. Rain began to fall in sheets, and wind whipped violently through the trees. A horse, startled by the sudden storm, bolted from its stall. Elena rushed to calm it, slipping in the mud, her hands scraping against the rough wooden beams of the stable. Panic surged through her as she struggled to regain control, and just as she began to fear she would be swept away by the chaos, a strong hand grasped her arm. The rancher had arrived, moving through the rain with determination. His presence was steady, his calm voice cutting through her fear. "I've got you," he said firmly. Together, they guided the horse back into its stall, securing it safely. Soaked to the bone and trembling, Elena looked at him, her eyes wide with awe and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You're capable, Elena," he replied softly. But even the strongest need someone by their side. In that moment, amidst the torrential rain and the chaos of the storm, Elena understood the depth of his care. It was not born of obligation, nor of fleeting attraction, it was genuine, steady, unwavering. She had been sold by her family for being too plain, dismissed as unworthy, but here was a man who saw her true value, who cherished the very qualities that had always been invisible to others. As the months passed, their bond deepened. The rancher's gestures of kindness became more personal. A shared cup of tea at dusk, quiet conversations in the warmth of the hearth, laughter echoing across the open fields. Elena found herself opening up in ways she had never done before, revealing her thoughts, dreams, and even fears. And the rancher listened, not just to her words, but to the silences between them, understanding the unspoken depths of her heart. Then, one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the horizon blazed with gold and crimson, the rancher approached her in the fields. There was a seriousness in his gaze that made Elena's pulse quicken. "Elena," he began, his voice steady, "I have watched you, and I have seen the strength, the kindness, and the beauty that exists within you. Not for what the world calls beautiful, but for what is true and lasting. I want you, not for a day, not for convenience, but for always. Will you be with me?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of relief, of joy, of vindication. After a lifetime of being dismissed, overlooked, and undervalued, she had found someone who saw her completely. She nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." The rancher smiled, a smile that warmed her from the inside out. He took her hand gently, guiding her to the veranda where the sky burned with the colors of sunset. In that moment, Elena realized that she had been sold for being too plain, discarded by those who should have loved her most, but she had been found by the one who mattered. The man who saw her for her heart, her spirit, and her unwavering soul. Elena smiled, finally understanding the true meaning of beauty. It was not in the eyes of the world, not in the fleeting judgments of family or strangers, but in the eyes of the one who truly sees you, who treasures you for every quiet, remarkable part of yourself. And as the sun sank beneath the hills, painting the ranch in gold, she felt a peace she had never known, a knowledge that she was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, but finally home.